Hello everyone, welcome. I'm Louise Crowe, Chief Exec of My Society. Thank you for joining us for this 1-hour session on how access to information can help us understand AI decision making in government. At My Society, we create and run digital services that break down barriers to democratic participation, equipping people to take action and drive meaningful change. We run the digital access to information service What Do They Know, which has now been used to make more than 1 million access to information requests. And we're also members of the ATI network, which is a network of organisations across Europe and around the world who run similar ATI platforms to support and enable people to use their right to access information in effective ways. And this event is produced in collaboration with our ATI network partners Access Info Europe and Frag den Staat. It's the second in a short series on the value and practical application of access to information in key public interest domains. We're running these events because we believe that knowledge is power across the complex challenges that we're now faced with. And a key goal for us as organisations running platforms that can enable and support access to information is to build collaborations where we can bring that power to key issues that are affecting all of our lives, and in that way support effective reporting and research projects and campaigns. In a time when there's a new generation of AI tools that are rapidly being rolled out by governments around the world, potentially bringing significant benefits, but also creating significant new risks, the topic of the safe and ethical deployment of technology in decision making is a hugely important one. I think there's enormous public interest in transparency around the ways in which software systems are being used and also what the impact of that usage is. So I'm delighted to welcome and really excited to hear from our 3 expert speakers today. Between them, they have a wealth of experience in the way that access to information rights can be a valuable tool to illuminate the way in which algorithms are being used in government decision making. I hope you're going to find some practical inspiration from this session. As ever, we really welcome your feedback and we're interested in opportunities to build further collaborations and support work on bringing transparency to the use of new technologies in government decision making. If you do want to get in touch for either of those reasons, please do drop us a mail at aticop@mysociety.org. So that's ati-cop@mysociety.org in order to contact the ATI network. So with all of that out of the way, in terms of running order today, we're going to be hearing first from Morgan Currie, who is the Senior Lecturer in Data and Society in the Science, Technology and Innovation Studies Group at the University of Edinburgh. Her research and teaching interests focus on open and administrative data, automation in social services, activist data practices, civil society and democracy, and social justice and the city. So a huge range of very interesting topics. She's going to tell us about her recent research that analysed 51 FOI requests to reveal how the UK's Department for Work and Pension uses secretive data analytics to detect welfare fraud and uncovered broader learning for civil society actors using FOI to enhance transparency. Then we're going to hear from Gabriel Geiger, who's an investigative journalist specialising in surveillance and algorithmic accountability reporting. He's been an investigative reporter with Lighthouse Reports since 2021, and his works appeared in Wired, The Guardian, Der Spiegel and Motherboard. He's going to share behind-the-scenes information from the Lighthouse Reports award-winning Suspicion Machines investigation, which revealed how machine learning algorithms were disproportionately targeting individuals based on ethnicity and gender. And unfortunately, he had a scheduling clash right now, but he shared his expertise with my colleague Julia Cushion last week, and we're going to play that interview for you. Finally, Jake Hurfurt is Head of Research and Investigations at Big Brother Watch. He previously spent 3 years working as a news reporter for the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday, where he was able to bring stories on big tech to a wide audience and hone a cache of investigative skills. He's currently digging deep into the use of AI, algorithms and predictive analytics in welfare and social care. He's going to tell us about new developments in government algorithmic decision-making that he's uncovered and how transparency loses out as a result. And then it's going to be over to you for your questions. So please do enter your questions in the Q&A section as you think of them, and do also upvote any questions from other people that you would like to hear answered. And my colleague Julia has very kindly agreed to wrangle those questions when they come in. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Morgan. Over to you, Morgan.
Thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint here and let me know if you can see that. Okay. Yeah, thanks so much, Louise, for introducing me. So this talk is based on a report that we just put out this summer called Algorithmic Accountability in the UK, How FOIA Sheds Light on Automated Welfare. And I co-wrote this with Dr. Ali Spring, my colleague at the University of Edinburgh. The report was really inspired by my longstanding interest in this topic of the Department of Work and Pensions use of automation for fraud detection. This is something I wanted to study for a really long time. A couple of years ago, I remember talking to people who know this topic much better than me, saying, I really want to study this, and them saying, you can't. There's just no information about it. There's very little information online or in the public domain, and the DWP is not going to talk to you for security reasons. So I put it aside and then came back to this just recently, in part because I realized that I could use What Do They Know as a way to get information about the systems that are being used. I'll get back to that. For now, just to say a little bit about the topic. So the DWP has been using data matching and data analytics, we know, since at least 2010. So this is using their own data on claimants and comparing it to other data sets that have information about claimants. So for instance, who's living in their household to see if they match or to find anomalies. We also know that since 2022, the DWP has moved into adopting predictive machine learning models. So these compare claimants to past claimants who have committed fraud to see if new claimants share similar profiles. If they do, then they'll be assigned a high risk score for potential fraud and error. The DWP has been asked to share more information on these systems. An example of that is in 2023, the Information Commissioner warned the DWP that it risked being in contempt of court for not releasing more details about this, because very little is known about these systems. So that's why we can say there's a real lack of public scrutiny about automated decision-making systems being adopted by government agencies. I would direct you to a really great article by Scott and Edwards that came out this year about this. So it's a paper called The Inscrutable Code, the Deficient Scrutiny Problem of Automated Government. And they argue that those bodies that are supposed to be overseeing government agencies, so in particular Parliament and the courts, they really don't have the adequate tools right now to address this problem. And that's where civil society, I think, comes in and is playing a really, really crucial role. I've been noting civil society is way ahead of us researchers in writing reports that are bringing these systems to light. And they do this in several different ways. Public campaigns, you're going to hear from Big Brother Watch, Jake. They do really fantastic public campaigns to get the word out to the public. Some are going to court. An example of this is the Child Poverty Action Group taking the DWP to court over their automated payment system and the way it affects working claimants unfairly. Online registries of these systems. So the Public Law Project has an excellent database where you can just go to one place and get more information about them. Writing evidence to public reviews, to Parliament. And I would say a lot of these are based on freedom of information requests. So these organizations are getting more information than what's in the public domain using FOIA as a tool. So that gets back to how I think we can, as researchers, leverage archives like that have been amassed by What Do They Know and other websites like this to look across all the different freedom of information requests that have been put to different agencies about these tools to get a bigger picture, kind of a gestalt. And we call this the FOIA mosaic method. So this is where you combine FOIA requests that you can get from websites like What Do They Know with other public documents to get a bigger picture than you could just by looking at what's in the public domain. So to do this, we searched for keywords that had to do with automation and Social Security fraud. What Do They Know had this great, you can refine the search by asking to only look at requests to certain agencies. So we only wanted to look at those requests going to the DWP. Doing this, we collected 51 requests and we analyzed these in chronological order. And we also looked at public documents that were being referred to in these requests and news reports that were being referenced. We found that most of these requests are responding to the DWP's annual report and accounts that come out every year. So this is what one looked like for 2022-23. This is kind of the starring document because it will say something usually about the fact that they're using automation because it discloses that they are doing something proactively to try to catch rampant fraud. So they'll mention it, but usually say very little about what these systems entail. And so these reports come out and that kind of spurs a flurry of requests by people wanting to know more. Okay, so what did we find out? I'm just going to give high-level findings. The report has more granular detail on all of this, and I'd be happy to answer questions as well if you have if you want to get more details. Okay, so some of the high-level findings. We were able to find out from these requests some of the organizations the DWP has been sharing they have data sharing agreements with for their data matching and why. We've been able to find out just a little bit more detail about 5 machine learning models that they've created. These are the predictive models that risk score people. Not much detail, but we know what they're called and in part what data they're drawing from. We've gotten a bit more insight into the various teams that do this work. And we also can see how the DWP is monitoring for risk and for fairness and bias. So this is mostly through data protection impact analyses that they've released to some requesters. DPIAs, as they're called, are required by law if you're using personal data in a way that could carry some kind of risk. So they've done a lot of these DPIAs. And so they've, in our corpus of answers to these requests, we have the primary source DPIAs that were given to people who requested them, both about the data matching and the machine learning models. They're heavily redacted. I mean, in some cases to a point where you really can't get anything beyond the names of some of these systems, but very little else. Another really key kind of primary source document that was released to one requester in the data set is a fairness analysis that was carried out on the first machine learning model. That first machine learning model, it's called the Advances model. It risk assesses people applying for a universal credit advance or a loan. DPIAs, I should say, are carried out before you start designing these systems or using them. The fairness analysis is post hoc, so you're testing the system once it's been built for bias, and in particular to understand how it works across different protected characteristics. This fairness analysis showed that there were some issues with certain people with certain protected characteristics being flagged more than others. So that's kind of a high level of what the requests told us about what the DWP is doing internally. So shedding some light on these systems. What's interesting about doing this method of FOIA analysis is you can also learn about how the DWP responds to FOIA. So you can get kind of an overarching view of to what degree they're actually answering requests versus refusing them. So out of the 51, only 7 were fully successful. 24 were partially successful, so the majority. So that means they would share some information but reject sharing all of the requested information. You also have 16 refused, and then in 4 cases they said they didn't have the information. We also see that when they refuse requests, they're mostly relying on Section 31 of the Freedom of Information Act. So they have legal protection not to share because they're arguing that releasing that information could jeopardize law enforcement, so catching fraudsters, essentially. We also found that in all cases except one, the DWP only released DPIAs after the requester made a complaint to the Information Commissioner's office. What that means is that other people making the same request did not get the DPIAs, did not get those documents. And what we found, therefore, is that there was disparate treatment across requesters. So those who had the time and the resources and the kind of know-how to go through the complaints process, the ICO, they would get the information, but people who wouldn't get that information. Okay, one thing I was not expecting to find, and I'm starting to wrap up here, is that you also can learn a lot about kind of civil society actors and the tactics they're using and how they use FOIA. So for instance, often in their requests, they'll refer to public documents. So you can trace, they saw a public document that kind of instigated them to make the request, and you can trace kind of their dialogue as they go back and forth in some cases with the DWP to get this information. You can also link FOIA requests to the news cycle. So in the case of the fairness analyses of the first model, that release of that document was given to The Guardian, which made this issue very public. So you can see how this work gives more visibility to these issues around, transparency and the use of automation and the use of these automated tools. You can see how some requests build on past ones. So some people are actually using, they're using what do they know, so they can refer to past requests and say, well, I want to know more about this. And what all this shows is the role of civil society of making something, a line in a public document into a public issue and giving it, making it something that is publicly discussed and of concern. This is my last slide. Okay, so we have some recommendations at the end of the report, kind of based on what we found. And so I'll just go over those and then hand it back over to Louise. So first of all, we think all these documents have been released. They're public on what do they know. We think they should be made kind of more systematically public by the DWP, either through their website or by using the UK government's algorithmic transparency recording standard hub. We think they should just disclose, even if they're redacted, all the DPIAs and any fairness analyses that are being carried out for their machine learning models. I mean, this is how you know if these models are biased or not. And we think they need to have a more consistent approach to FOIA requests so that some people aren't getting more information than others. So that's it. I'm happy to answer any more questions about the report, any more kind of details that people might want. And thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Do ask your questions for Morgan in the Q&A. Particularly interesting to hear about the different treatment of requests. We're now going to hear Gabriel's reflections when Julia interviewed him last week. Julia, if you're happy to share.
So yeah, my name is Gabriel Geiger. I'm an investigative journalist at Lighthouse Reports, where I've led our work on algorithmic accountability. So investigations that try to hold AI deployed by government agencies typically accountable. So, suspicion machines is sort of an internal name for a body of work that we've been conducting since 2021, where we've investigated the deployment of risk scoring AI in different European welfare systems. This investigation started because we sort of way back in 2021 looked at our colleagues in the United States and elsewhere who had done a lot of work on risk scoring systems and criminal justice systems in the US. So there's a sort of seminal machine bias piece from ProPublica looking at recidivism software deployed in the US and felt that there was a need to sort of tackle these types of systems in a journalistic sense on a sort of a similar scale here in Europe and sort of settled on welfare systems as a sort of quintessentially European issue. And when we sort of set out on this work, we wanted to not only be able to sort of report on these systems in the more traditional sense, like the human consequences or the companies that are making them, but we also wanted to actually obtain deep access to the code and the model files of these systems so we could test them ourselves for check if they were discriminating or working as they're promised to. Our sort of original entry into that body of work took us to the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, where a risk scoring system there was being used to um, predict which welfare recipients were committing welfare fraud. Um, After a year and a half using FOI laws, we sort of managed to obtain deep access to the system, the programming code, and found that it was discriminating against people with migration background, women, people with lower income, parents, and even more so people sort of at the intersection of these different categories. And we ran our own sort of data-driven audit on the materials. We co-published that with Wired magazine in the US. And since then, I've done sort of a string of similar investigations, again, relying quite heavily on FOI laws to obtain technical materials for AI systems in countries ranging from Denmark to Spain, Sweden, France, Serbia. Um, and this has sort of become an ongoing sort of theme that we've been working on, doing similar types of stories in different countries across Europe right now and more recently globally. FOI, I should say FOI has been at the core of every single suspicion machines investigation. So it's been something we use quite a lot in those investigations, and of course, sort of figuring out the nuances of different FOI laws can be challenging. We always worked with local partners though, and sometimes they help to fill some of that gap. I mean, generally speaking, for cross-border FOIs, we found that using some sort of system to track each of your FOIs is quite important. So we have like a sort of tracker template, partnering with local organizations on the ground, not reinventing the wheel. I mean, I can't tell you how much time I wasted in the beginning by sending out all my FOIs the same template across different countries sort of one size fits all approach and just wasted a bunch of time because I didn't formulate my requests in a way um, that was appropriate for different jurisdictions. So for example, in the UK, you can sort of ask these more open-ended questions, I believe. Like what's the name of this software? Whereas you can't ask a question like that in the Netherlands. You have to ask for a specific document. You can't just be asking a question in FOI. So those sorts of nuances are really good to understand before you invest a lot of time in doing a big cross-border FOI effort. First of all, our strategy generally is to first ask some sort of press questions to the authority, like the press officer, and something really basic that isn't going to sort of alarm them too much, like, what type of AI softwares are you using? What are their names? What type of data do they use? And, is there a private vendor involved? So four really basic questions. And those if you can get an answer to those will allow you to at least make your FOI request a little bit more specific and less likely to be rejected as, overly broad. So try to, as you well know, like try to going on a fishing expedition in FOI can be a bit risky because there's a lot of ways for governments to sort of, not answer your request or sort of avoid sharing actually interesting information. We oftentimes think about it in sort of three different tiers. So you start for both asking sort of for the most basic standard documents that in principle should always be there. Things like the data protection impact assessment, human rights impact assessments, database code book. This is like the documentation for the database that whatever AI system is actually drawing from. If a private company is involved, the tender or contract or their sort of proposal. So sort of these sort of standard documents that should, in theory, accompany any sort of advanced IT project. Based off of the sort of replies you get there, you can go sort of move on to the second tier, which is again more specific, a bit more likely to sort of that you'll resistance. So things like the code book, sorry, the manual that are given to caseworkers when using the system, the full set of variables. So these are the points of data that an AI system actually uses to make its decision or prediction, and their weights, the performance evaluations of the model. Again, that's something that's usually happening with an AI system that the data scientist, whoever's actually running the system, is checking, is it actually working? And then the third tier would be the sort of the most sensitive or difficult to get things. This would be things like the source code, um, the training data of the AI system, the actual sort of machine learning model that's making predictions. The sort of rationale behind using this tiered approach is that oftentimes if you sort of ask for all of this at the same time, a government agency will just sort of freak out and just immediately shut things down and not give up anything. Um, or it's too much of a fishing expedition. And by using this sort of tiered approach, you're more likely to sort of get, this sort of initial set of documents that, one helps you make more specific FOI requests for like tier two and tier three. And sort of secondly is sort of a backstop in case, okay, you can't get the really sensitive stuff like the code or maybe even like performance reports. You can't get that, but at least you have the data protection impact assessment and some sort of basic materials that help you, if you're a journalist, produce maybe an initial story, or if you're civil society, maybe like those are already materials that you could write a report about, or even issue some sort of press release about, or maybe start some sort of campaign. So that over time we've sort of felt that this sort of three-tiered approach is the most effective way of sort of doing a deeper investigation into an AI system with FOI. There are some considerations there that one might make. I mean, if you have a really long FOI timeline like you do in the Netherlands, so in the Netherlands it's quite common for it to be 6 months until you get a response, then maybe doing three tiers might be difficult because it could be 18 months. But if you're somewhere in the UK where you generally have like a 1 month timeline that can be extended, then if you have the time, I would try to split it into tiers like we do. We have a guide that we wrote with the Pulitzer, published by the Pulitzer Center, which is an organization in the US. that talked about our FOI process for the suspicion machines work. Also includes things like a FOI template that we use for our investigations, and some various descriptions of more specific documents you could ask for. So that might be a helpful resource for people. And then if people want to follow our work, I suggest you go on to lighthousereports.com. Sign up for our newsletter. We also have all our suspicion machines investigations there listed with methodologies explaining how we did them for each one. And me personally, I don't use Twitter anymore, but I'm on LinkedIn. You can find my name, and I post updates there. But yeah, really sorry that I'm missing the event. I would have loved to have attended.
Really interesting to hear the details of a journalistic investigation there, and I love the open source approach. Finally, we're going to go to Jake.
Let me just turn things on. There we are. There we are. Now things are working. Just give me 1 second to find the slideshow. Can you be able to see that, or do you just need to give permission for it? Try to screen share, but
we see the screen sharing, but we don't yet see slides.
I forgot to say why. Don't need them. It's fine. Let's talk. So yeah, I'm Jake from Big Brother Watch. I run investigations here. So we focus on tech and digital rights kind of across the board, really. So everything from welfare to facial recognition, sort of the Home Office encryption stuff that's been in the news today, so all kind of that. But in terms of our work on automated decision making, that has mostly been in the welfare system. Also, it's been around facial recognition, as we believe that's an automated decision. And from my experience, I've been working this for 5 years. There's been a real retreat in transparency over that time in terms of how much the government is willing to tell, how much it's willing to disclose about the automated decisions, both to me as civil society, to people like Gabriel as journalists, or Morgan as academics, but also to the people impacted, which I think is really important. I think a lot of people impacted aren't told about that, aren't told about these decisions, and in the first place, that's really a huge problem. If these are making decisions about your life and you don't know about it, how can you then seek redress when it goes wrong? Get that accountability. It's really important in safe decision making. I think we've seen a backtrack on transparency kind of in the very recent data use and access bill. Many of you sort of have worked on that, know about that. But previously in British data protection law, we had protections against solely automated decisions. These are automated decisions that have big effects, that had no human involvement. We've seen that gutted in the data use and access bill. So we are going to see over the next 12, 18, 24 months, a massive expansion of the British state's use of automated decision making. And it's going to be less transparent than ever, because as the law stood, there was a right. If you had one of these decisions, solely automated decisions made about you, you had a right to be told about it. So many of you, if you applied for a credit card or a loan online, that's been automated. There's been something in the T&Cs that you may have seen. You have a right to have a human look at this. And that right is going to be has been watered down hugely in legislation. So already there, we're seeing a huge drawback in transparency around the use of automated decision making. And the Secretary of State has Henry VIII powers. The Secretary of State can just designate certain categories of decision making as exempt from the few protections that do exist. So we might be in a situation where they decide policing decisions are suddenly exempt from the protections. So people have to be told that these decisions are made about them, automated procedures being used. So that really is a problem. In my work over the past 5 years, I've seen time and time again, even the protections that used to exist, those really being exploited. A lot of government departments and certainly local government basically use a threshold that was ever so slightly below the legal threshold for telling people that automated decisions were being made. So there's a system called the risk-based verification. It's mostly been phased out, but was used to effectively risk score triage people applying for housing benefit or council tax support at local authorities. And they were risk scored as high, medium, or low, and this determined how much evidence you had to provide to get access to the benefits they were entitled to. And the human involved in this decision wasn't never allowed to downgrade the score, and only upgrade the score in incredibly rare circumstances. But every single local authority in this country argued that that was a human involvement in the decision, so it wasn't solely automated, which meant individuals' right to be informed, that right for it to be transparent was removed. In my personal view, and I'm not a lawyer, I think if that was challenged in the courts, if that was challenged about whether it was a solely automated decision, somebody would have won. But that's the problem with data protection law when we're kind of looking around this transparency, is that individuals have to challenge. It's very hard for organizations such as Big Brother Watch to lead that challenge. It has to be an affected individual. And how does that affected individual launch a challenge and try and push back about the use of these decisions if they're not aware of it in the first place? So then that leaves it to people like myself and Gabriel and Morgan to dig into it and raise that awareness. And we kind of see that the state doesn't really want to tell us either. So that's, you end up in this kind of catch-22 where the law is weak. So affected individuals are unable to find out how they're affected. So people like myself end up having to do these FOI phishing expeditions to work out, well, what's going on and where can we try and gain transparency. So I think, yeah, this gutting of Article 22 and those protections, we're going to see a further decline in transparency around algorithms and automated decision making in the next 12 to 18 months. It's not quite hitting yet because the law's only kind of just going to force, but I think it's something that's going to be incredibly concerning going forward. But I'm mostly going to talk about kind of a very small bit of transparency. I think it's perhaps the most important one. It's one that often goes unaddressed, which is transparency in procurement of these automated decision-making tools. Because quite often, when smaller bodies of the state, so central government does have the capacity to often develop these tools, algorithms. Smaller state organizations, the police, local authorities don't, they procure them. So we will see procurement notices going up. We've seen them recently for all the new police forces who are acquiring facial recognition vans. They're procuring this technology. Essex Police procured a different facial recognition technology. The data science firm Xantora, who are kind of a knockoff British Palantir, they're procured by local councils to provide the services they do. And because it's provided by a third party who argues that this is commercially sensitive information, that revealing their algorithm would be detrimental to their business, the transparency one would expect from government decision making is almost nil. I'm going to try one more time to make the screen sharing work because the example is worth it if it behaves itself. But if not, I will just talk you through it. So does that work? Does that come through this time, Louise?
No, sorry.
For God's sake, I hate technology. Oh well. So going back to risk-based verification, which was this triaging software that was used to risk score people applying for certain benefits. Biggest supplier of this was Xantora, kind of the slightly Palantir company they're a British company, quite big in the UK. After a long FOI battle, I got hold of actually using the technique. Morgan talks about kind of the mosaic FOI because it was used by a few dozen local authorities. I asked a few dozen local authorities documents, and they all gave me slightly different ones. And between that, I was able to really put together quite a detailed look at how they were working. And in these documents, you'd see a list of predictive characteristics that we use to decide how risky somebody was. But they said explicitly in these documents, we are not telling you what the full list of predictive characteristics is, because that would potentially reveal our trade secrets, our commercially sensitive information to the local authority, and they knew they were subject to FOIA as well. This stuff might have to get published. So in a situation where people are getting branded high risk by the local authority, being put under huge demands to provide evidence for their benefits claim, and the local authority had no idea why. They didn't know how each predictive characteristic was sort of rated, how much weight it was given, but also didn't even know all the ones that they used. They were just assured by Xantora that it was all fine. This is a massive problem. The public sector quality duty isn't something that's delegable. State bodies aren't supposed to say, well, our supplier told us it's fine. The duty is incumbent on the state actor to comply with the PSED. And this situation, again, in my non-lawyer's view, this was not happening. How can we have transparency in decision making when the state actor who's fundamentally making a decision doesn't know all the things that go into that algorithm? So I found this really worrying, and kind of as a practice going forward, how can we have state decisions that then can be challenged and be held to account if the state can't explain them in the first place? So that really was a massive problem with the Xantora. And I think there's also, again, particularly smaller organizations, there's a technical knowledge gap. Xantora often went into organizations and integrated themselves very strongly with kind of local councils. They provide the technical knowledge. So it isn't just that local authorities and these other bodies weren't told what was actually being used to make these decisions. It was they didn't really understand it because these are kind of cash-strapped small local bodies. They don't have people who are trained in computer science and machine learning. So it's the reliance on external knowledge and these commercial interest secret keeping is creating a real problem of transparency. And as we're having more and more kind of AI and algorithms, more companies of various repute selling into the states, we're going to see this grow, because these companies need to defend their local knowledge, because they, as a company, would cease to function if they couldn't sell to more and more people. So they're going to defend this. We're going to have people asking, well, why is this decision made about me? And the state won't be able to explain it. And then for people like myself who are trying to get this through FOI, Section 43, as much as I often object to how it is used to kind of keep this sub-secret, is a legitimate exemption. It is not as much as I want to know these things, making a company go bust by revealing their trade secrets probably isn't in the balance of public interest. So we need to, I think, in my view, reform the law around this to find a way to make sure that these private companies can't just hide behind commercial exemptions and not tell the state how it's going on. Another example is how Essex Police are the only police force in the UK use CoreSight to an Israeli facial recognition firm who are also been used by the IDF. But their equality impact assessment is an absolute mess. It cites an assessment for a completely different algorithm made by a completely different company as evidence that the CoreSight algorithm is fine. It cites evidence from marketing materials from CoreSight, from the US Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security have gone on public record to say are incorrect, and really questionable interpretations of some other US studies. Essex Police have never done any testing themselves. Apparently it is ongoing now. They've been using facial recognition for almost a year with an equality impact assessment that is either based on marketing material or based on tests on a completely different algorithm. And that'd be like saying, well, Windows does this, so you can do it on a Mac as well. They're not comparable. But again, because this kind of marketing dazzling, this kind of lack of technical expertise within the procuring body, it means that the transparency tests aren't done, that we don't really understand how it works. So how can they be transparent about the decision making that's going on? So I think for me, we need to really look at the rules for procuring AI in the first place if we want to be transparent about it going forward. We can't allow commercial interests and those kind of commercial arguments to shield private companies and that who are supplying the state from any kind of scrutiny. And I don't know whether we need to give the ICO powers to go into this and verify. I don't know what that looks like. I'm kind of an investigator, not a policymaker. But as it stands, the commercial interest exemptions are incredibly strong, and we're not enforcing the laws we even have around equalities because the people who are procuring it do not understand how these systems work. So that's kind of a huge problem. And I think the black box more generally, again, is a transparency thing. We could have all heard about it before. But I think as we're procuring more and more AI, we have to think not just of transparency for people like ourselves and civil society, but actually the people who are impacted, because they're the ones who really matter here. If we're having people having huge decisions made about their lives and the state can't explain it, that becomes a problem. And I think for me, is a red line that we shouldn't be using this stuff anymore. Yeah, so that's sort of interesting. But yeah, but again, most look at procurement because I think it's a huge kind of gap. We look at the impact of these systems, but for me, the problem starts when these systems are bought and supplied to the state.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah, hugely interesting to hear about the amount of procurement going on, that gap in knowledge as well. Super interesting. And as you say, as we go into different kinds of AI systems, understanding much more of an issue. Julia, I'm going to pass over to you to wrangle some questions for Morgan and Jake now.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you to all of our fantastic speakers. I would say, please do put your questions in the chat and I will send them to us. But if we don't get to them, we can still send them around afterwards and get some answers from our speakers, including Gabriel. He was very happy to answer things as a follow-up. So yeah, please do put your questions in. Thank you again to our brilliant speakers. And if you haven't already, go to the Q&A tab where you can also upvote questions that you'd like to hear answered. So we have a nice question from Phoebe. What are the government departments that frequently push back on providing data? I don't know if anybody has any experience on that. And Phoebe kindly says that it's an incredibly interesting webinar and appreciating all the speakers. So thank you, that's very kind. Yeah, Jake and Morgan, do you have much experience of that, or like in your research? We have also we could share some statistics as well in our follow-up, because there are trends that appear over time.
I'll just very, very quickly, I can just say, and I know this based on the public law projects database that they keep on these tools, that the DWP is frequently mentioned, but the one that's mentioned, I want to say even more, is the Home Office. I don't know, Jake, if I have not looked into that myself. My focus has mostly been on the DWP. Jake, I don't know if Big Brother Watch has looked into this with regards to
Yeah,
the Home Office, or if you have other answers as well.
I think the DWP are particularly bad. I in the court tribunal hearing at FOIA, I got to the stage where they cited national security arguments, which were a complete nonsense. The Home Office think of the worst of the Home Office because they do have national security duty that often becomes something they hide behind. They're not great, and surprisingly, DSIT as well are an absolute nightmare. I think so. They're kind of three that are worst. Surprisingly, MOD, I'd give them compliments, say they're the best, maybe because they're soldiers and they're a little bit more straightforward. But I surprised to find the MOD the easiest to deal with, which I never would have expected.
Fantastic, thanks so much. I also, if people don't know the brilliant Martin Rosenbaum, he wrote a really interesting blog recently about 20 years of freedom of information that has some statistics about government department responsiveness and how that's changed over 20 years that I'll maybe send out in the things afterwards. A friend of my society, Martin, maybe he's on the call. Fantastic, thank you so much. Right. Do we know of any examples of good practice on automated decision-making transparency? Are there any countries doing a good job of this? Just sorry not to be the hogger as the person doing the questions, but part of the interview with Gabriel that we'll put out as a clip afterwards that I wasn't able to include for time was a really interesting point, not just on the algorithmic use within the countries, but the different FOI practice in the different countries, and citing that Sweden he actually found really hard to work in, even though it's supposed to have good FOI laws, just because of the case-by-case nature of it. But that is Gabriel's work on the suspicion machines is a comparative analysis, so I would point people there. But yeah, Jake or Morgan, did you come across any examples of countries who are being very transparent in this area?
I think so. I'm mostly UK focused, but Canadians have a decent transparency register they've been trying for a while. I don't know how much detail they're still getting into, but that was quite good. The Dutch seem to be reasonably forthcoming as well, kind of suspicion machines work. I mean, the UK is trying its algorithmic transparency reporting standard, but in my view, it's too weak at the moment. The various government departments are refusing to comply. So on paper, the UK system could be good if government actually kind of followed through and enforced it properly. But at the moment, they've been too weak and letting departments get away without actually complying with what they're supposed to be doing.
I have two examples in the US. So one is a few years ago, New York State required that any government agencies that were going to use automated tools to register it and make some details about it transparent. My understanding is that that hasn't been robustly followed through on, but I haven't looked into it lately. But I do know you could at least look up that law that was passed. Another, I'd say, kind of gold standard is a system it's also in the US. It's in Allegheny County. This is a county in Pennsylvania in the US. There is they have they use machine learning risk modeling in order to score people for risk of child abuse, and they have made the underlying data available to researchers. So there's actually a lot of research into those systems, kind of similar to what Lighthouse has done with using some of the underlying data that they've gotten access to in the Netherlands. A lot of people have been able to research the system because of the kind of fairly, I'd say, actually relatively radical approach to transparency that they have. I would also point you to understand more about that to Virginia Eubank's book, Automating Inequality, which has a whole chapter on that system. So she comes away very critical of it, but in terms of transparency, it's been kind of like a gold standard bearer.
I'd also add in the UK, Bristol City Council are probably the best in terms of their transparency. They're not flawless, but they are much better than basically anybody else. They do tend to disclose not the actual data, but the data sets they use, the algorithms and stuff. So as much as I don't love how they use them, I'd sort of be more complimentary. They at least are much more open about what they're doing. A lot of places are a lot less transparent than that. So if anyone UK based, that's probably a good place to start.
That's fantastic and so helpful. Thank you. I should have added as well, somebody has asked where they can get the slides for this presentation. And if it's okay with you, Morgan, and also Jake, if the slides that you prepared, I'll share those around afterwards, as well as links to the things that we're talking about. And two questions from Cara here. With the heightened demand for energy and water to power AI plus the excess heat created, how do we balance the usefulness, ethics, and reliability of AI versus the climate impact? So maybe like a question on AI in general there, have you had any thoughts? And then more specifically about the DWP, looking at that and how consistent citizens get fair and just support in the face of AI and system failure, if you have any thoughts of at an individual level what people could do.
I can say something to the first question. So I think it would be important to note that, and I'm not an expert into the energy demands of what the DWP is doing by any means, but I do think it's important to make distinctions. So a lot of the high energy intensive AI would be generative AI, or AI that's being trained on massive, colossal data sets. Now, this is not what the DWP is doing. What they're using is actually fairly traditional machine learning to data match, or machine learning to predictively risk score claimants. And that I don't think would be in the same category of kind of energy intensive AI that a lot of us are starting to kind of adopt in our daily lives with generative AI. So that would be my answer to that question. That said, we're seeing, just not to go off on a tangent, but we are seeing more and more policy rolling out requiring agencies to start to adopt generative AI and to experiment with it. And so I think that's going to be an interesting development in this conversation. Not something I know anything about at the moment because it's so new, but I think this will be kind of, like Jake was hinting at, kind of next steps or next horizons in this discussion.
In terms of the kind of DWP and the carers allowance there, a lot of the DWP's tools do in theory seek to find all kinds of kind of fraud and error in the system, but their focus is obviously on kind of what they see as criminal fraud. So it may be that it could be that this one small kind of silver lining, this kind of general kind of horrible use of AI, could be that some of this stuff gets flagged. But I think it is the general approach to the DWP to be fraud and error treated as one, which is a problem, which you're going to get huge amounts of people who've made a genuine mistake on a document, someone who's in a vulnerable situation, made an error because people make errors because we're human, and getting treated as could be a criminal. And I think the carers allowance is a really kind of worrying example of this, that people are getting hammered for being overpaid a tiny amount. I think we could see with these kind of large models that are just looking for is a claim wrong rather than is someone committing criminal fraud, that people are putting them through very stressful things for genuine human error. And I think it's going to cause all sorts of problems going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you both for great answers. And obviously I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say that What Do They Know is a service where anybody can make a freedom of information request, and there are loads of examples on there. And I think it does help highlight the scale of these issues and us to keep asking these things and digging away. And even if you've never made a freedom of information request yourself, you can go on and see literally millions of others and follow requests that you're interested in. So that's my plug. And another question here, why do you think governments are getting less transparent on automated decisions, and what are the reasons behind this? So maybe thinking through some of those trends, perhaps also, sorry to make the question harder, are there any ways that we can counter this trend? But yeah, the reasons behind this trend and what you're seeing.
I think the first reason is probably bad press coverage. You've seen stories like kind of the stuff Lighthouse have done over in Europe. We've seen the sham marriages algorithm get an absolute battering after PLP's work over in the UK. So I think there's this kind of bad press coverage doesn't make governments more secretive. I think also these models get increasingly complicated, that actually putting this information out has become much more difficult. It's not now just a kind of a basic regression model where it's like, here's some characteristics, here's like the output. It's that the black box is inherently opaque. So they're becoming more opaque in turn. I think they're also just becoming more integrated. The governments are as opaque as they've always been. It's just that AI used to be sitting on top, and now it's much more integrated. So that, as it goes to the heart of government, we're just going to get less transparency as it becomes more integrated into their day-to-day decision making, I think.
Yeah, I agree with Jake. I think so. In the data set I looked at, it was very interesting. The requests start in 2018. And at the beginning and throughout that year, in the next couple of years, the DWP would respond by to requests for DPIAs by sending very lightly redacted ones. This would be for the data matching. And then there was a point at which, I want to say it was in 2020, where that just stops. And any DPIA that they give after that is heavily redacted. And I agree. I think it had to do, there was it was in 2018 that Virginia Eubank's book comes out, that Philip Alston writes a scathing report about the UK government and about the DWP as well with regards to these tools. And I think there was a skittishness that started at a certain time period. And ever since then, it's been harder. But that shows up in the data set, actually.
I think that sort of report I put out, Big Brother Watch, sort of again, sort of the something called Suspicion by Design, has a section on the government's general matching service. The data matching service has been running for about a decade. And I asked, there was some documents already in the public domain. I asked for very similar documents this year, and the transparency over that time has declined massively. They wouldn't give me documents that are basically already in public domain from a few years ago. They wouldn't give me the new versions. That kind of really illustrates the transparency backsliding we're seeing with this, and I think it's for all the reasons Morgan said.
Absolutely, that's so interesting, and yeah, really interesting when you mentioned, Morgan, about how all of the successful requests had involved going to the ICO to challenge them. Okay, I think I'll maybe hand over to Louise to wrap us up rather than go into more questions, just so that we can close properly on time before our 2 o'clock deadline.
It's always so hard to have to close when it's been so interesting. Huge thank you, Morgan, Jake, and also to Gabriel. You've been fantastically interesting speakers on what is obviously a really important public interest matter. Thank you all for joining us. I do hope this session has given you some ideas for the future. Yes, and as Julia says, we'll be sending out all the materials, including slides and any questions that didn't get answered, and hope to see you at the next event in the series. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.